this room. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the second in this series about living on a working waterfront. And the focus for this one is multi-generational families. And so we have representatives here from different families, and they'll be talking about who they are. And it is a collaboration from Harpswell Heritage Land Trust, and Julia is here. Maine Coastal Fishermen's Association is Monique and Susan. Harpswell Anchor is Greg. We have some representatives, new board members, Susie and Rachel, who are from the Cundy Harbor Library. I'm the director of the library. And so welcome. And I hope that you enjoy this conversation. Oh, they aren't here.
Oh, they're not here, but.
Oh, and Holbrook Foundation, although they're not here, and also New Meadows Seafood Co-op, and they aren't here. So I will let our moderator take it away.
Thank you very much, Heather. So I'm Monique. I'm the Director of Community Programs for the Maine Coast Fishermen's Association. Our office is located in Brunswick on Pleasant Street. Maybe you've seen it. We're the blue building that's kind of across from McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts area. Our mission is to restore the fisheries in the Gulf of Maine and sustain Maine's fishing communities for future generations. We were founded in 2006 by groundfish fishermen out of Port Clyde, but have since grown, and we now work with fishermen from most of Maine's communities and even a couple in New Hampshire and Massachusetts on a number of different issues in a number of different fisheries. A lot of my work pertains to the working waterfront, seafood, and most recently fisherman wellness. I'm really excited about this collaboration because I also live in Harpswell. I live on Orr's Island. My husband's a commercial fisherman, and I have two kids that both have their student licenses. My daughter for sure wants to go lobstering. My son's 12. As of right now, he still wants to be like a professional soccer player, but he also has a student license and is setting himself up for the future. So as I mentioned, I'm really excited about this collaboration and this opportunity to present these panels. I did a report a couple of years ago, and you can see this is what we call our pretty side of it. The report in its entirety is on our website. But we have some of these prettier ones that are on the back. And basically what I did was I went into 10 working waterfront communities in Maine to just sort of understand what was going on, and worked with some fishermen in the communities to sort of figure out what were some paths forward. And one of the things that came up over and over was the need for more communication, education, and outreach in the community to try to more closely connect the town, people that have lived there forever, newcomers, but to the commercial fishing industry and sort of what happens on the working waterfront, not just in the past, but like what's going on right now. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, and then I have some questions. But this is meant to be somewhat of an informal conversation so that we can all get the most out of it. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them. I will say if it's sort of a longer question, maybe we can hold it to the end, but I can help manage that. So for now, Chris, why don't you start? Who are you? Where do you live? What do you fish for? How long have you been fishing? Kind of why did you get into fishing? Get into some of that stuff, and then Matt and Amy can go.
Okay, my name is Chris Kerber. I live in Brunswick. I fish out of Harpswell, Interstate Lobster, which is Potts Harbor, that area.
What do you fish for?
Lobster. I fish for lobster. My path into it was not very traditional. Both my teachers both my parents were teachers, and my father got my brother and I licenses when we were 5 and 7, and in summer we hauled traps, by hand over the rail of a skiff. I got bit by the bug, and this is what I wanted to do. And this is my 3rd season running my own boat. I sterned for a long time through high school and college, and did a tour off Matinicus for 5 years before moving back here to run my own business.
Thank you, Chris.
My name's Matt Gilly, also a lobsterman. I live an eighth of a mile to the north and I fish an eighth of a mile to the south. Tiny County Tower, so I'm pretty local. I was born here. I grew up the first part of my life on Field Road at the head of the harbor there. My family owns the beach there and the house behind it. That's where I spent the first 5 or 6 years of my life until my parents built the house up off of Oak Lake Road and spent the rest of my time there. The only time I moved away was I started lobstering actually. My dad was the one that got me into it. He fished and he got me my boat when I was probably 5 or 6 like Chris, and I started hauling out of a skiff and did that growing up. And thought I wanted to do the college route, moved out of state for a few years to do that, and that just wasn't what I wanted to do. Came back and I've been fishing ever since. Yeah, was that cover it? Yeah.
That's good. We'll get into it.
Amy. Hi, I'm Amy Watson Saxton. I did grow up here as well. I'm a little older than Matt, but yeah, I grew up right down the road at Watson's General Store. My father has lived there his entire life, and I went out west for college, came back, and knew when I came back that I wanted to be involved in the fishery somehow, some way. I did have 17 traps growing up. That was kind of a big deal. I was telling Matt that, I built them all, so had the pounded thumbs to prove it. These were wooden traps, so they were, well, they smelled good because you got to brand them, do all these cool things with the wood. They were really hard to build, so I was happy to learn that. But I knew when I came home that I was meant to do something around the water and figure out a way to stay here and have a life here, because I think it is the best place to raise a family. Is that everything?
Does anybody in your family fish or want to go fishing?
Yes. So my dad fishes. So we'll get to how the family got here in a minute, but he's one of the first generations that actually fishes in my family. A lot of people think it's a long-standing tradition of the Watson family, but it's actually not. They've always been involved in the fishing industry, but my dad's the first generation to fish. He fishes for lobster. He also is a dealer, so he buys lobster and used to buy shrimp when there was a shrimp season from a variety of boats. And he got my daughter into it, who has this incredible ability to understand the industry and boating. We got her a skiff when she was 8 years old, and it just took off from there. She's just been a fisherman ever since. She really wants to be called a fisherman. That's very important to her. And her boat is named I Mean Business, and that's exactly what she means, business. You don't want to get in her way. So she will, yeah, she's business. So
Thank you. So Chris, I have a question. You said that your dad is, although he was a teacher, is who sort of got you and your brother on this path. What was it that inspired him to sort of get you on the path? Just because you guys are in Maine, it's fun, or?
I don't think his intention was for me to actually become a fisherman, honestly, because he taught school during the year. The summertime was like kind of an opportunity to like step outside of that role and do something different. Yeah, my brother sterned for a while, and like I said, I just loved it for so many different reasons.
What are some of those reasons?
I think one of them is it taught me a lot of like pretty valuable life lessons at a young age. You're interacting with a lot of personalities, and your character and reputation takes a long time to build, and it can very easily be taken away. And I got to see the value of hard work and how it paid off, both like financially, but also from a social capital perspective, and earning the respect of some captains that I consider to be respectable, good captains was, felt good being young. So, yeah. those two things. I think.
Yeah, and think about that with my kids, like why I encourage and support them to go fishing. It's the lessons that they're learning on the water, even if they weren't gonna go fishing for their careers moving forward. I mean, my daughter's in Vogue right now learning how to weld, so she can maybe do something like that and also go lobstering. But I think about when she also goes pokey fishing with her dad during the summer. Teamwork, patience, perseverance, failure, being on the water, having to think on her feet, the physical science, and just the like firsthand knowledge and of experience of being on the water that most kids just don't get. I was in a meeting today and we were talking about how some people don't even get to see the ocean. And here we are for you guys as kids and for me introducing my kids to the water. I feel like that's so valuable and such a fortunate thing that we get to offer our kids. Do you think that for Lexi as well?
Absolutely. And for myself, growing up here, being around self-employed people and seeing there is no job description, there's no such thing. And when you have this boat floating out in the middle of the harbor, you're always checking on it, you're always taking a look at it, you're always making sure your bilge pump is working, your battery's charged, and you always have like all of these things going through your head. And then all fishing has become increasingly more difficult and requires a lot more schooling, understanding, education than most people realize. So I think everything that Lexi has learned, that I have learned from being around fishermen, being around that working waterfront, serves you well. It really does. And I really like to see the teenagers, you know, making their own money and being excited about, you know, getting new traps or buying a new truck, or, you know, it's really fulfilling. I think it, and then I think it also, at least at MSAD 75, they do a nice job of kind of like bringing that into the classroom. I think especially at the lower level at the elementary school, they're always trying to bring in some marine biology and some of that stuff into the classroom because it's so prevalent here that they want kids from away too, to understand what goes on in that.
Matt, do you think your parents were thinking about some of that stuff with like you and your sisters and why they might have ended up taking a different path while you ended up on the path you did?
I think, yeah, to a degree. I know my dad always, I think, wanted me to be a fisherman. I think my mom was more the one that wanted me to go to college, maybe try something different. You know, me and both my sisters went to college. They just both ended up being teachers, and one of them teaches at Harpswell School, actually. Still, so she stayed local, and she certainly, they, like Amy said, she has me come in once a year and talk to the kids and stuff about lobster and stuff. So they do a good job about teaching the kids and stuff, what goes on and stuff like that.
Okay, do you ever get questions from the kids about lobstering when you're at the school?
Yeah, a lot of them ask how, a lot of them are very excited about it and ask how to get into it. And as I explained to them, that's the best age to get into it, just based on how the lobster industry is set up with the licensing system. Now, it's easiest to start out as a student with a student license. The thing that excites them most, though, is always bringing stuff I catch, and they're more excited. They get to touch it. It's still, I have fun too. I'm still a kid at heart. It's show and tell all over again. So.
Oh, it totally is. Yeah, I like to give my sex ed lessons with lobsters, not with kids, but with the adults. If I had some lobsters here, we'd be talking to sex ed. So
Give me a minute.
It's fun because people they turn into kids, you know, when you start explaining the differences. And like I worked with the Lobster Conservancy for a long time. I was a volunteer rock flipper for ages. And that was another way to build stewardship and combine the community. And it's the Lobster Conservancy, Diane Cowan, who used to live here, started it. She's a PhD, and her dissertation was on the sex lives of lobsters. So she was always looking at the juvenile lobster habitat, and one of the best places is actually Matt Gilley's grandparents' beach. So that was one of the places that we flipped rocks and measured babies and just looked for you know, what kind of abundance and health they were in. But that was a great bridge between folks that had nothing to do with the lobster industry, that had an interest in it, and then the science and the fishermen. So everywhere we went, people would ask us how the baby lobsters were, and that was a lot of fun. But yeah,
Matt, can you tell us quickly or whatever, how that process worked for you, getting your student license and then becoming a commercial fisherman? What was that like?
I was the last generation, when I turned 18, I got my class 1, I didn't have to go through any of the student license stuff like it is now. I didn't experience any of that. I was the last generation that didn't have to. Now, I believe the way you would know better how it works with your kids. It's student license.
Don't ask questions that you can answer.
But it works, they have to log, what is it, 2,000 hours by the time they're 18.
2,000 or something.
Yeah, and so many days or something. And then they get their class 1 license. Whereas if you don't go through the student license program, the only way to get a lobster license is you have to apprentice, work for somebody that's had their license for 5 years, log 2,000 hours. And I believe it's 5 years you have to do it. And then you go on a waiting list. And at this time, for every basically 5 licenses that aren't renewed, they let 1 new license in. So really the only sure path into the industry is through the student license program, really.
really is.
But it is like, as crazy as that is, it's like a path into the
Yeah,
fishery
it definitely is.
versus many of the other fisheries.
Yeah.
Right, there is no
So did
path.
you have your student license and then get your commercial license, or did you have to get on the
Yeah,
wait
it's
list?
there,
Okay.
yeah.
You were right before. Yeah, yeah. So my kids, every time they go fishing, they actually have to keep track of all of their hours. They have to log it, which is also a very good lesson. It's the responsibility of keeping track of your time. And then they have to go to the Marine Patrol to get it okay. The cool thing is it's not just the act of lobstering that they get to log. When they build traps with my husband, when they go pokey fishing with him, it's basically learning the business of fishing, which I think is something that's really important for everyone. And we talk about this a lot at MCFA, is fishing is actually only a percentage of a fisherman's job. They also build traps, fix their boat all the time. Always been boat maintenance, always working on their boat, always going to town for more parts. Like there's so many other things that go along with fishing other than just fishing. And so that process sort of helps kids out. So Lexi, she had her student license, right? And she still has it. She must be getting close.
Right, but she's a full-time college student, so she can continue on.
Yeah,
She's 23, right?
Yeah.
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 And she really hasn't spent as much time. I would like her to stern more because the hours add up faster when you're out there for 8, 10, 12 hours.
Yeah.
But her hauling her traps, she's always kept a pretty small gang because she was hauling by hand. And then with a really cheap electric hauler, we did move her up to a hydraulic hauler, but still, she's this big. And and she always wanted to do a good job and keep only the amount of traps that she thought she could really handle. So it's gonna take a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she's got drive, and I feel like I see that with my kids, especially with Jocelyn, like the determination that,
Yeah, and back to what you said about, getting the approval of people that you respect. It's huge in this industry. I think when she'll ask the guys questions, or she'll mess with them, and I think they like that because it's like they like to see somebody young coming up and having that drive and love for the industry. So
the camaraderie.
yeah,
Definitely there. So as we go into this then, if I am someone that just moved to Harpswell, and Amy, you'll probably be able to answer this really well as your position as a real estate agent, what do you want people to know about being in a working waterfront community?
I'm hard to work with. I feel like an ambassador a lot. So I've had 2 careers since I moved home from college. One was at the State House. I worked in politics for 14 long years. Took lots of years off my life. And I did dabble in some fishery stuff, but that was more for sport because I had like a real job with real stuff that I had to do. But then occasionally I'd run down to the marine resources room and just try and help people there, because, not everyone loves public speaking, and some of these guys, even though they're the best public speakers in the land because of their, the tone of their voice and their stories and everything, they don't always know that. So I'd love to prep them and get them ready for what they're about to face. My second career is as a realtor, and that's really how I've stayed here in this community and been fortunate enough to stay here. I feel like an ambassador because I do mostly second homes. I do a lot of waterfront sales. So of course that brings in a lot of folks from away. So I get to meet a lot of people. I have to size people up pretty quickly when they want to live in Harpswell, because there are just some places that some people just aren't going to be happy at, and I can kind of tell that. So for instance, if you call me and one of the first sentences you talk about is seeing on Google Earth a derelict boat, like in somebody's yard, I'm probably not bringing you to Cundy's Harbor, because there are a lot of derelict boats. So if you start mentioning things that you don't like or you don't want to be around, I can find a good place for you. But if somebody says to me, you know what, yes, I'm retiring, but I don't want to be, in Sunnybrook golf course land. I want to be with the action. So I had one person spend the night here because I was like, you're next to a commercial wharf. That means loud diesel engines, stinky bait, dogs running up and down the road, tires squealing when they've had a good day, the guys, or a bad day. That means deck lights, that means generators, that means trucks in and out. Like, if you can't handle that, I don't want to hear about it a year from now. And I certainly don't want all of my friends and families to be like, who brought in this guy, So I try and explain to people and give them a very unvarnished idea of what the different parts of Harpswell are. And there are enough parts of Harpswell that I can usually find a place that everybody, it's good for them. But I'm really particular about bringing someone here because I'm like, this is either going to fly or it's not. And the guy that owns the agency I work for says I lay it on too thick, but I'm like, I'd rather have you hear from me of how bad it's going to be, and then you be delightfully surprised at how much you love it and how much you interact with the folks. And just one quick thing, I just went to Savannah for work to meet with some of my Southern colleagues, and I was back to a bar. And I had a pile of Southern seafood in front of me with my husband, and I could hear the fishermen behind me talking. And I had that moment of being in Washington General Store when somebody walks in and they just look like they don't know what they've walked into, and the fishermen all stop talking, or when they do talk, nobody can understand them. I can, he can. But there are certain characters that you just have grown up with that you understand. But those guys behind me were talking and I could barely understand what they're talking about. I had a kind of an idea of what the problem was, but I couldn't understand some of the terminology. And I thought that is what my buyers feel like. So, and this year has been especially difficult because of the pandemic. And there have been a lot more people coming in at a faster rate than we're used to. And I've broken up with a couple of buyers this summer because I just was like, I can't work with you. You're too difficult and you need to calm down. I tell people you need to slow your roll. You're in Maine now. Take a deep breath. Get a craft beer and let's just calm down. We don't need to, it's not going to get you anywhere to be bossy and kind of a know-it-all. You just want to just kind of roll in slowly and just get your bearings, ask some questions, meet some people, observe, and everything will be okay. And I'll give you the secret handshake as long as you aren't a jerk. So it's been an interesting summer, but I'm enjoying it, and I do love meeting new folks. And face it, sometimes we complain. I guess locals complain a little bit, but it is some of the new folks that are coming in with skill sets that lead our boards and our volunteer groups, and for time, they have the time and energy, and I think it's a great melting pot here.
So Matt, taking that into consideration, what's some of the things that you would want people to know about working waterfronts? And in that same vein, with what Amy just said, like, are there ways, or in what ways do you think the fishing community could work with some of the newcomers to help make sure that the fishing community is here in the future?
I guess the biggest thing, Amy calls it, says it's bad, and I know what she's saying. It's not necessarily bad. It's just that we have weird hours. And we don't work on a schedule per se. We don't have a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday job. I mean, Mother Nature controls a lot of what we do and what happens with our businesses. I mean, we can only go fishing when the weather accounts for that, you know, so. And when we do go, it's normally nicest first thing in the morning. So we get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, start our boats, and some of them are loud. Mufflers are expensive. And in the salt water, quite honestly, they don't last. They rust away. So, I mean, mine's not one of them, but I have wet exhaust, so I'm not the one you hear in the morning. But some, I mean, some of them are loud. And it's not that they're trying to be loud. I mean, one of my best friends has probably the loudest boat in the harbor. It sounds like he's going 100 miles an hour and he goes by you maybe going 6. You know, but it's just one of those old engines, the old screaming Detroits. And like I said, we start early in the morning because that's when the weather's the nicest. This time of year, we end up having long days because the traps are further out. So the lights are coming into the harbor later at night. And leaving earlier in the morning because we have further to go to get there. And I guess some people complain about the bait smell. And the gentleman that works for me is a good example. He actually came from Skowhegan. He'd never been a lobsterman. He's a retired Marine. I was friends with his brother and I met him that way. And he decided to come lobster with me and he puked his first day because of the smell of the bait. And I was looking at him, it was fresh bait. My buddy had just caught it the day before. And I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, he'd grown up on cow farms. You know, he'd milk cows and stuff. I cannot stand the smell of a cow farm. I'll tell you that. But he was the opposite. He couldn't stand the smell of the bait. And now he doesn't even notice it. You get used to it after a while. So, I mean, with the bait thing, if you just give it a little bit of time, it does go away. As silly as it sounds. Yeah. It smells like money. And we're 99% of us are the friendliest people that you'll ever meet. I mean, there isn't a guy in that harbor down there where if I broke down out there, I could make a phone call on the radio or on my cell phone and they'd drop everything they were doing to come get me. And the same thing goes on land too. So, I mean, we're not these, we just have weird hours and
you talk funny.
We talk funny. And we're loud. Everything we do is loud. And it's partially, I mean, I'm probably yelling right now. It's because I'm on a boat that's loud. My wife tells me all the time, man, stop yelling at me. I say, Katie, I just can't hear. Yeah, I'm deaf.
Diesel deaf.
We're diesel deaf, and the rope and the holler is loud and stuff. I just bought a brand new Lobster Pro this year. It's terrible. But so, I mean, I guess everything we do is loud, and it's not because we're trying to be loud. It's just that everything around us is.
So that's hilarious to me. So I'm partially deaf in my left ear just because of the illness that I had. My husband's deaf in his left ear.
Me too.
And I work with a lot of commercial fishermen. And I went into a meeting once with a number of other nonprofit organizations and I couldn't hear anything. And I was like, geez, I feel bad asking everybody to speak up and speak up. And then the next meeting I went to was at Becky's Diner and it was upstairs with a bunch of commercial fishermen. And I realized, oh my God, I couldn't, they were talking normally. We all yell. And I've actually been talked to by people in my office that have asked me, why are you yelling? And I'm like, well, I can't hear. And the guy I'm talking to can't hear and he's yelling. So I totally get that. I think that's hilarious. So Grace, what about you? Especially as someone that's, you know, more new to Harpswell or even just being in the waterfront growing up. What do you think? What's something that you would like people to sort of know and what's something that maybe people should know that we could take into the future kind of thing?
I think access is like a big thing that's like super important to a lot of fishermen. And I think that that's something that scares a lot of fishermen. It's like the access to the coast and the working waterfronts being restricted or taken away. And I think naturally, if it's something that we're afraid of, you're going to get defensive of it. But yeah, that access piece I think is something that's really important.
I agree, and I think it's access both in regards to getting from point A to point B. It's access regarding infrastructure, like the wards themselves. Parking is a huge one. Storage is a big one, gear, and even the sight, sounds, and smells, right? That's a part of accessing a means to go to work. If you
Right.
can't turn your engine on, if you can't turn your lights on, then you can't access the opportunity to get out and work. And so I think that's important. And I would also extend that to the intertidal becoming harder and harder to access because of private property signs or sea level rise or conservation closures, biotoxins in the intertidal, and then not being able to be opened back up. There's a lot of threats that are outside of a fisherman, whether wild caught on the ocean or in the intertidal, that are sort of nerve wracking and important to consider, which is part of why we want to do these panels, right? To just be able to talk about them and talk about access and what that means for the fishing community in Maine. So I guess as an extension of that, and maybe I kind of already asked that, but what kind of support do you think neighbors in Harpswell that aren't a part of the fishing community can give to the fishing community? Chris, you moved, so now you gotta answer.
Well, this is kind of a bigger picture answer, maybe. And Matt and I were kind of talking a little bit about, I guess there's like some urgency right now in the lobster industry with regard to, I think a lot of vulnerabilities through right whales and wind turbines. And I think that, well, you're all here, which is awesome. Thank you for being here. But I think like it's important to like learn and educate and know both sides of the issues to like help support the industry because, you know, I hate to say the word like threatened, but that's generally, I think, how most fishermen feel right now. Is that they're like it's threatened, and I think any support from anyone, you know, can go a long ways. So that's it.
Yeah, it's a good answer. Building advocates, so learning and then being able to not just say I support you, but also being able to go out to the world and say I support fishermen because
And no.
And I saw that a lot at the State House. Because generally speaking, when there is that kind of threat, it's a windmill or the right whales. There are large, very well-funded groups behind these measures. And then you've got a bunch of independents. And yes, they can belong to organizations and have memberships and work together, but they are not in rooms together ever. You know, when you think back through your life, the things you care about, you ended up in meetings and you ended up talking with people and getting this kind of groundswell of support. That really can't happen with them. And that was the thing I saw. They were kind of always at a disadvantage because, you know, they're not talking together all the time because they are independent. They're out fishing and making a living. So this is just another thing that they have to fight. And I think they get picked on a little bit because it's a whole lot cheaper to go after the Maine lobster on right whales than it is to go across the shipping industry. You know, when ship strikes are a known cause of fatalities. So it's much easier to go after them and check a box and feel like you've done something versus going after, you know, multinational, massive companies.
So I have a tough question for you then, Matt. Since we were on some Zoom calls together about offshore wind, how do you feel when you're in those calls?
If there was a word stronger than infuriated.
I thought you were gonna say homicidal.
That's maybe, I can't say that. No, infuriated and just overlooked, I guess would be the other one. They have us, like Monique said, I've been, I don't know how many meetings over whales and windmill, whales and windmill. But they're checking a box by having us on a call. They don't listen to anything we say. And And I'm all for green energy. I have nothing against that. I have nothing against windmills. They think it's NIMBYism that we don't want it in our backyard when that's not the truth at all. I'll put 10 in my backyard. I mean, they can build them any day of the week. I have no problem with that whatsoever. I don't want to see the Gulf of Maine industrialized. That's what I don't want. We don't know enough. We know more about the moon than we do the oceans. And we're talking about putting wind turbines out there. And you're putting it out there in the Gulf Stream, which is it's a major supplier of many, many food sources for many, many creatures. And we have no idea what it's going to do with currents and everything. And they just think we're fishermen that don't have a clue. And I'm young, I'm only 37, and I have over 30,000 hours on the ocean. So, I mean, then there's people that have way more than me, and they don't think I have a clue. And I don't think they've spent 1,000 hours on the ocean in their life.
Well, we've still got a lot to go, but to you, thank you, and to Chris, thank you, because Chris, you're also our zone council representative. So the lobster industry is managed by a common pool resource management. We have 7 zones, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Yes, 7 zones. We're in zone F right now, and Chris is on the zone council with that, with another fisherman. Actually, there's what, like 6 different zones. Amy said something about a job description earlier. The job description of fishermen has changed dramatically in the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, to the point where they used to just sort of be able to go fishing and check the weather and do their gear maintenance. Now there's quite a bit of paperwork involved with commercial fishing, and participation in meetings, for better or for worse, has almost become necessary because they have to advocate for themselves, because the commercial fishing industry does not have lobbyists in DC. We don't have the money behind it. It's organizations like MCFA and the MLA that are behind fishermen, and we're doing the best we can to advocate for them. And I appreciate, one of the legislative meetings we were in was almost 5 hours because of all the commenters from the other side. And he took time out of his day, where he's not fishing, to be able to participate in that meeting. Whereas myself, I'm a nonprofit, and other nonprofits were just sitting behind our computers continuing to work while we were listening in this. And Matt and other fishermen were not on the water. They were not working on their boats. They weren't doing their gear management to be able to, participate in those meetings. So things have changed quite a bit, even in the past 5 to 10 years. So kudos to you guys for being here and speaking up, but also participating in the industry in those other ways. I know I appreciate it as a fishing family very much. Let's see, what other questions? We have any questions from the audience yet? Oh, hello.
I was just wondering about co-ops and how you all are feeling about co-ops, because I've been hearing a lot about them lately, especially in oystering. I've been hearing about it. And so I was just wondering if that's something that would help to make you a more powerful voice in situations like you were just describing.
So lobster cooperatives are actually pretty common on the coast of the interstate, technically the co-op.
The co-op.
Yeah,
in the
it's a
harbor.
co-op.
Harbor, it's co-op.
Yeah.
And does that help you? Does it give you more ballast when you're talking to other people outside?
I think it's more cooperative, like business management. So in regards to the price that they're getting, the price for gear for them, it's almost like a buying power as opposed to a lobbying power.
So could it be used that way?
Potentially. I think that the Maine Lobstermen's Association, Maine Coast Fishermen's Association, we sort of act as like the cooperatives for them. But I know the New Meadows, the oysters, they're growing, they're becoming sort of a co-op. And I'm not sure exactly how theirs is going to be modeled, but the potential is always potential. Working together, Maine Coast, our slogan at Maine Coast Fishermen's Association is "Together we persevere." That's a huge part. For better or for worse, lobstermen, Maine fishermen tend to be an independent bunch. They tend to be somewhat introverted. That's why they like fishing and being out on the water. So it's not the easiest job in the world to always get all of them on the same page, especially, and I think that that's an okay thing. They're all incredibly passionate about their careers, and I wouldn't even call it a career, I'd call it like a lifestyle. But I think that all of that being said, their goal to, ensure that the next generation gets the opportunity to fish and that the Gulf of Maine is protected. I don't think you could find a single fisherman that would disagree with either of those statements. So, which actually, that leads me to another question, since we're here to talk about families and generations. What do you think the next generation of fishermen looks like? Anyway.
I don't know, there's one.
I think
The way
there's gonna
things
be a
are-
good gap.
A big
Yeah.
gap.
Yeah, a large gap.
Well, like in many industries, the average age of the main fisherman right now is 55, 55 and 55 plus. There's gonna be a lot of retirements and not a lot coming
And
in.
there's not the fisheries that they're used to. I mean, too. I mean, look at, your dad used to buy shrimp. There's no more shrimp. There used to be whiting plant down there. There's no more whiting. I mean,
Well,
it
guys
takes me.
used to fish all year.
Right,
just for different
there used to
species.
be groundfish boats in the harbor. There's no more groundfish boats in the harbor. We've been back in the lobstering corner. And the way things are going, I mean, we have the most sustainable fishery in the world. That's been proven. I mean, the lobster stock isn't a problem at all. The lobsters are there and the lobsters will be there. But it's the other regulations. and
But I
stuff.
want to interrupt you on that. It's the most sustainable fishery in the world because the lobstermen did it. They were not told
Yeah.
to do this. They did it on their own. That's how the Maine Lobstermen's Association was born. Because they decided to govern themselves before the government governed them. And it's really important. And I think that's one thing that people don't understand if they come from other places, especially in New England. They have a fishery in other New England states, but it's a lot different than the one here, a lot different than the one here. And here we don't take the oversized females. We don't, we're very careful. We don't take the undersized, they've been conservationists for a long time. And the proof is in the pudding in the strength of their fishery. So I think if you've only watched Deadliest Catch and only seen the kind of mega corporate structure in Boston, then you probably don't really know the Maine fisherman because it's a lot different animal. And they've done an excellent job. I mean, I've watched my dad buy stuff and pitch it over. He just paid for it, but he's gonna pitch it over because it's on the line. It's too uncomfortable with, that being just on the line. So he's gonna save it for tomorrow.
That's a unique and fantastic story, for sure. Isn't part of it though, because of the nature of how the fishing occurs? And in other words, it's hard to scale up. Or correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't love it, honestly, but it's hard to scale up in harvest at the level that you can go in and say drag or shrimp or,
They do it in
big
New
example
Hampshire.
is cod, you simply think of.
In New Hampshire and Mass, that's how they fish the lobsters. There's, especially in New Hampshire, there's a company called Shaft Masters. And they own, how many?
And just like the name,
I think 13 boats,
They give
15
the
boats,
industry
big
stats.
steel 90-foot boats. They actually fish out off the Gulf here, just beyond the 3 mile line in our waters of the Gulf of Maine. And they don't have the same trap limits that we do. And they just hammer,
15,000 pounds.
yeah, they catch 15,000 pounds in a trip. I got 15,000 pounds in a week. I wouldn't know what to do, and they're doing it. I mean, I couldn't even put 15,000 pounds on my boat if I wanted to. Yeah, and I got a 38-foot boat, but I mean, it is scalable, but in Maine, they don't allow it to be, it has to be owner operated.
but that's why you guys are so successful.
That's right, that's why it's successful, but that's what makes it hard too, like Monique was saying, is we're a jack of all trades, master of none, as they say, like we're lobstermen, mechanics, accountants, now lobbyists, and we're not good. The only thing we're good at really is lobstering, and that's what we want to do. That's what I want to do. I just want to go haul traps. I like being outside.
Well, and doesn't it make you a little mad, the guys that fish outside and you've got a boat, an eighth of a mile away,
Yeah,
do
and they,
anything they
yeah,
want,
and they
it's
can keep-
flawless, you know? And then you
they can
have to-
keep the oversized ones in New Hampshire as well, and like Monique was saying, we have zone lines there, A, B, C, all the way through G, and we're in F, and F is from Small Point over in Pittsburgh and extends south from Cape Elizabeth and extends south, so imagine a square, and it goes all the way up to 40 miles. And I have a federal permit, but I have to stay, even when I go into federal waters, I still have to stay in between those imaginary lines, like, I can't venture outside of them. And if I'm one of those boats from New Hampshire, I can go up and down the whole coast.
Right, how far out does the main law that you were talking about, how far out does the fishing occur that's under the main state regulation?
Well, it's only where they're landed, right?
Yeah.
Right, it's only where they're landed is how they base a lot of the law on it. Maine controls the jurisdiction out to the 3 mile line. So to fish anywhere inside the 3 mile line or to come in waters with lobsters inside that line, you have to have a Maine license. But if you spend your entire time 3 miles from Maine, the shore of Maine, you can fish with a New Hampshire or Massachusetts or any other state license as long as you have that federal permit. And it's where you land your lobsters that the laws apply to you. So with a New Hampshire license, New Hampshire laws apply to you.
So if you're landing, even if you're, like my husband has a federal permit, if he goes offshore, because he's landing in Maine, he still has to stay within those lines regardless if it's 3 miles or 50 miles. He's gonna stay within that space. I think one of the other things I think of just like as a mom of kids that want to go fishing, and because I work with lobstermen as well and groundfish fishermen, I've heard stories from some of the groundfish fishermen about like how they got started and they would go out with their dads on the boat when they were 9, 10, 11 years old. And I have to say, because I'm knowledgeable and pretty closely tied to the industry and understand what happens on the water, I can't imagine letting my kids do that. I can't imagine thinking about my 10-year-old or 11-year-old on a boat, standing on a milk crate. There's just something different now. And I think that what's different isn't just the risk of being on the water, but some of the constraints and boundaries that are going to be and judgments that are going to be put on my kids that don't necessarily make that risk as worthwhile as it used to be for fishermen. It used to be, like Amy said, they would have an annual round. They would go shrimping, they would go groundfish fishing, they would go lobstering, they would do some carpentry, there's a lot of caretakers around here, taking care of summer homes. And it was just part of that lifestyle and easy to sort of move in and out. And now I think about, okay, if my kids go on a groundfish boat, they also have to learn about all of the reporting. They also have to abide by all these rules. They also have to do all of these things and work and work and work and work so hard and still maybe not afford to be able to keep groundfish fishing or to be able to go through all of these different fisheries. And so while a lot of the regulations are well-intended and to protect the environment and the species, they've also sort of diluted and diminished and taken away the bright parts of the fishing industry that a lot of families love and remember. I'm not from a fishing, I mean, my family fishes, but my parents didn't fish. And I just think that there's some of that that's just been extinguished. That's scary. I mean, even when my kids are out lobstering, it makes me incredibly nervous. And that's also in part one of the next sessions we'll do in the spring, just we'll, sneak peek is what happens on the waterfront with recreational boaters and people that maybe don't live here and are kayaking or in motorboats or even in yachts. What happens to my kids when they're in their 20-foot privateer trying to haul traps and a boat goes flying past them because whatever, they're on vacation? That has the potential to roll my kid's boat and send them into the water. And that's so scary to think about, especially because they could be right, you could see land and that kind of thing can happen, which is why some of this education, I think, is so incredibly important, is because it's not just a boat that's out there, it's my family and the culture for a lot of us that are sitting up here. It's things that, it's our values that are out there, so.
That's huge. That's, yeah.
When you think about that with Lexi, especially when because she's got in what, like
Well,
a
and
open
she
console.
fishes out of a very busy marina, and during the pandemic, one of the things you could do was go boating, and a lot of people did, and a lot of people were complete novices. It's just, you have to have respect for the ocean, and you certainly have to have respect for working boats. Some of them have kids on it. It doesn't matter who they have on them. They have people on them. My father told me a horrifying story this year, probably told you, of nearly being run down by Jenny Bridges, I think. He turned around, and because of autopilot and because of novice boaters, he was on his little boat and nearly got run down. His first time in 50 years that he felt like he was probably gonna have someone come right up over the top of him because they weren't paying attention. And they didn't know what they were doing. And it's just like, if I ran through your offices with flaming torches and machetes, we'd have a problem, right? You think this person's crazy, but because it's on the ocean, some of this stuff slides and they think, oh, it's big, there's no, so you kind of hope that they maybe take out the lower unit on the ledge or something.
Yeah, I
Maybe
mean,
slow down a little, teach them a little prairie justice out there, just so they figure out that you don't go bombing around, and pay attention, stay at the helm. Because it scares me to death, my kids out there, and
yeah, it's really crazy out there now, and it's really changed, as you're saying, and it's.
a lot more traffic.
I totally respect what you're saying. I mean, it's where we work, it's our office, but it's the same for everybody. I mean, it's not uncommon, especially at night if you're out and there are yachts going by, like are clearly on autopilot.
Yeah.
Nobody's on watch. And it's really scary.
I think think about it. I mean, you can go spend millions of dollars and buy a boat, hand you the keys and you run it, hop in it and run it, I mean, you gotta take a driver's license, plane license. Nothing else is really like that. It's kind of,
RVs,
it's scary.
big, huge,
Yeah.
massive RVs.
I wish there was some type of voter safety, even something simple, even a written test that everybody had to take, for everybody's sake.
I think that's partially Maine's legislation.
Yeah.
Maine is the only state in New England that doesn't require a basic boating class
Yeah,
in order to get out on the water.
It's true.
that is true.
It's such a nice thing for people to be able to do. So I'm not begrudging the fact that they do it. It's just, we all have people we love out there, and some of these two are out there all the time. So it's a little frightening. Because when you've got a 20 trap trawl hanging off the side of your boat, you're not moving anywhere very fast.
Did you guys have any scary? Oh, go ahead.
I get a question. I mean,
It's a conversation,
No,
right? So
no,
just
no.
go for it.
specifically in Harpswell, access. Are you having trouble getting access in Harpswell? I mean, I know Interstate, I know Cundy, there are a lot of like small places, folks have wharfs, but is access becoming a problem in Harpswell? I'm just kind of interested specifically.
Yeah, I think so. And I think a good example of that are airboats. And I'm not a clam digger. I've dabbled in it, and I have the utmost respect for those guys. That's literally backbreaking work. But I think you see a lot of these airboats now, because back in the day, the clammers used to just be able to walk through that little piece of woods by the house, dig their clams on the flat and walk out. And now it's posted. And there's no other access point to that, but to get one of these airboats and go that way. I think that's where you've lost more of the access are to your intertidal fisheries than necessarily, I mean, I can't think of any commercial fishing, lobster fishing wharfs that we've necessarily lost in that sense. But
We're not losing them, but the guys not being able to live here move away. So then you're hauling hundreds and hundreds of traps up the road to some other town and letting them dry unless you can find something here.
Yeah, I got.
And boats,
silly
where's
watching-
your boat living,
Yeah,
it's on water.
moorings are an issue in Harpswell.
Or Cundy's Harbor's a closed mooring.
Yep, not a lot of.
Yeah, I
moorings.
can't even get a mooring there. And I have a house and my dad has a couple, and I use one of my dad's moorings, but I can't get my
But
own.
thank God for that,
Yeah.
because if you didn't.
He's had them for 50 years or better now, probably.
The other thing that happens for clam harvesters is when the intertidal though is that people aren't taking care of like their septic systems and
Mm.
flats have to
Those are the
close
best
because of toxins. They are though. I know.
Yeah,
They're
they're
very
right.
secret
Yeah.
stuff.
That nasty
Yeah.
mud in the Harrison pit.
Yeah, so
Those
Harpswell
times are
is
the
I
as
mean,
big as our community is, 216 miles of coastline, that's not all open to clamming. There's quite a few areas that are shut down because of toxins. And then you couple that with not being able to access via generational routes because new homeowners put up private property signs. The areas that they're able to clam shrink and shrink and shrink. And that's nerve wracking. And then the other thing is to plug my my report. One of the things that we discovered in communities all along the coast of Maine is we all have these bigger wharves that we see, like on Glendon's Wharf, the wharfs down here that you can see that are large and in operation. People are fishing out of them. There's lobsters coming over the docks. Those are pretty typical. But there's also these other very small wharfs that I coined to call discrete working waterfronts that don't necessarily have lobsters going over the dock, but they are used for gear, maintenance, storage, maybe to hop on a skiff and go do some stuff. Those we're losing pretty rapidly, either to storm surges or the ownership of that discrete working waterfront is unknown or done via like a gentleman's agreement and maybe not upheld by the next owner. And those literally make up sort of the fabric of coastal communities. You can know you're in a working waterfront community when you see a bunch of little wharfs with little huts on them and a bunch of rope piled up. And if we start to lose more and more of those, while it doesn't necessarily impact the economics of lobster, it does put more and more pressure on these bigger wharfs. And while they're not, I wouldn't call them vulnerable, there's probably not a ton more pressure that they can take. And then that starts to become a problem. So some of the work that we do around the working waterfront is tough because somebody says, yeah, but if you lose that wharf, what's the direct impact? What are the direct impacts? We don't have a lot of direct impacts in the commercial fishing industry because so much of what we do is like a web. And so there's like a small little pole and it might not directly affect, but I bet you at some point the whole web will be touched and there's a ripple effect. I mean, that's sort of Matt hinted at. We are incredibly dependent on lobster specifically in this state. And that's because years and years ago, as people started to pick and change and pull, there was a ripple effect to a fisherman's business that made them have to make financial decisions and decisions for their family that put them in the lobster business solely. So while there are opportunities with like student licenses, you can buy traps, by 50, usually somebody will give you some traps or teach you how to build your traps. That doesn't necessarily happen in the same way with the ground fish industry or even the scallop industry. I mean, you're talking quite a bit of money to access these permits and licenses. That's like crazy money. So, it's just all of these little tiny things that can end up happening, whether it's access to the wharves themselves, access to the permits, access to the gear, access to the intertidal. It's all sort of cumulative. So those are the types of things we sort of really start to worry about is like when little things start to change, we can see down the road that there's going to be bigger changes. And that's sort of like what lobstermen are yelling about right now in the Gulf of Maine, whether it's lawsuits from ENGOs about hypothetical white rail entanglements or offshore wind development. They're trying to say that those big changes are going to have some real ripple effects that are going to affect the entire industry and eventually Maine. So, yeah.
Monique, we have a question in the chat that is,
Oh, you're
Oh, I should. We have a question in the chat about the collaboration between an environmental organization, which I think is referring to Harpswell Land Trust. So maybe you want to speak to that, and a fishing organization, and asking whether there are impacts from environmental regulations that have a negative effect on fishermen. And since we're in the thread of speaking of changes that have to happen in the industry.
Sure. I mean, that's actually a tough question. It's a good question, but it's a tough question because I consider fishermen environmentalists. They just don't have to be called environmentalists, and they were doing it before it was cool. They were doing it before it was cool. They were doing it way longer. So I think it's necessary though for organizations like MCFA or even the Maine Lobster Association or others to work with environmental organizations, whether it's the Land Trust or Maine Island Trail Association or even the Nature Conservancy, because collaboration is where good work can happen. But it's like what Matt said. I think that there's elements of credentialism and other types of biases that happen towards fishermen that doesn't necessarily allow them to have an impactful seat at the table, not just a seat at the table. Like Matt said, not just the check in the box, but how are fishermen involved in this process in a way that their feedback and experience is going to impact the outcome. And I think that's the part that organizations like MCFA, that were actually founded for environmental reasons. The fishermen out of Port Clyde wanted MCFA, at which originally it was called the Mid-Coast Fishermen's Association. They wanted the boats that were considered the smaller boats out of Port Clyde to be able to go into rooms where federal policy was being discussed and support their businesses and their perspective on the environment. They were very conservation minded. So it's sort of what our organization was founded for. And these guys fish in the environment, they work in the environment, they need to participate in those things. And so I think that this kind of thing is incredibly important. I don't know if you guys want to, what you guys think about some of that. It definitely is not great when some of those organizations sue the lobster industry, that's for sure.
I guess the only thing I'd add is, I use shrimping, for example. They shut the shrimp down because they say there's no shrimp. But like when fishermen, I mean, there's probably a few less shrimp, but shrimp live for 7 years and then they die. That's just the way it works. They leave the first 3 years, they're males, and then they become females, and they have eggs, they lay their eggs, and then they die. But you can catch shrimp in a trap, and shrimp only go into a trap when after they lay their eggs, and they're going to die anyway. The last thing they do before they die is to eat. But they won't let us have a shrimp season because they say there's no shrimp.
Shrimp's actually a really interesting one, because I remember before the moratorium, talking with fishermen who were concerned about how the seasons for shrimp were set because they weren't actually adjusting to the water temperatures. So fishermen were catching shrimp with the eggs on, saying we shouldn't be catching shrimp with the eggs on right now, but nobody will listen to us, and therefore now's the only time we can catch fish. So this is interesting, and if you listen to our first panel, we brought this up a little bit. Seasons for fishing do not operate via Mother Nature. They operate via somebody in an office who looks at stock assessments and things and says, December 1, that's when this season should start. Fishermen have said, maybe we should look at water temperatures and use those as guidance for when fishing should be able to happen, because that's how it used to happen. Fishermen used to say, oh, the alewives are running and the cherry blossoms are, blooming. That means I need to get my traps ready to set. But now it's all done via dates on a calendar that don't necessarily depict what's actually going on in Mother Nature. So I think that's kind of like what Matt was saying. And that you should
no interest in, we have no interest in destroying any of the fishing industries. We don't want to catch every single last lobster. We don't want to catch every single last shrimp. We want to be able to do this for the rest of our lives. And we take measures and we try to do things like with the lobster industry before it was law, where there had to be any legislation done. I mean, we do stuff on our own to try to maintain these fisheries. And like everything, I'm sure there are a few bad eggs in every group, and I'm sure there's that guy that does want to be the one to catch the last lobster, but I don't like it. Anyway, so,
And he's not here.
Yeah, he's not here. heck with him.
Well, I've gotten a chuckle over the years watching the test trawls like for shrimp, and it's like they find out the gear's wrong or they're not in the right place or whatever. It's like,
We wouldn't keep going if there was no, like, just let the fishermen go figure it out. You know, if there's no
Right.
shrimp, we're not gonna spend
They're not
thousands
gonna
and
fish.
thousands of dollars on fuel just to go right around, tow a net around. What'd you do today? I got 7 shrimp. Burned 1,000 gallons of diesel.
no, but it's true. I mean, if there's no shrimp, then it would
We wouldn't go.
be handled right away. But
They don't even let us make the test.
that's what I was getting a chuckle about, because some of the test tows have been hilarious because the wrong gear was used, they were in
Yeah,
the
we
right
couldn't get
spots.
it on bottom.
They couldn't get them on bottom, yeah. So, yeah, so when you have people that are rookies out there doing the test trial, then of course the data is going to be crap. You know, it's not going to depict what's really there. If you send, you know, Mark Peters out there, then if he tells me there's no shrimp, then there's no shrimp,
Let's see 'em.
there's no shrimp. But if he comes back and says there's shrimp, there's shrimp. So,
I get a lot in the mail from GMRI. What's your organization's relationship, opinion of them, or the fishermen? Are they working with you all as much as they say they are? Or are they actually?
He looked up- he looked over.
I don't know a whole lot about GMRI. What I do know is that I assume that they're maybe working to support bigger, more industrial types of forms of aquaculture off the coast, versus sort of the small scale stuff, which MCFA is doing. That's just, I guess I have some backdoor knowledge of it, so.
They're a bigger organization than we are, and they work regionally, whereas we work within the state. We have worked with GMRI in the past. I actually did a really cool project with them on traceable seafood. So traceable, I'm sure everybody's heard that word, right? It's like if you get a food product that has a QR code and you can scan the QR code and you can see where that piece of fish or that carrot went from point A to Z. And we learned a lot with that project. And most of that was people actually don't really care about traceability. If you just tell someone this is from the Gulf of Maine, usually that's all they want to know. So we do find ways to partner with them in those types of things. And then there are projects, just like with every nonprofit or organization in Maine, there are projects that they work on that we're like, we're not sure about that. And I'm sure they think the same of us. But you know, places like the Fisherman's Forum, we don't get to see each other. We used to have, like when we would go up to Augusta, we would see our colleagues in the hallway. We call it like our hallway chats and stuff between legislative hearings and things like that. We definitely haven't been able to do that as much because of COVID. But usually we do like check in with those organizations like that to see where there is possibilities for synergy. And then we don't work together when there's not. MCFA has a program right now called Fishermen Feeding Mainers. And in that we are able to buy fish from groundfish fishermen that are landing at the Portland Fish Exchange. And then we're working with processors to have it cut into fillets and frozen. And then it is being donated to the Good Shepherd Food Bank, and schools have been able to buy it. And I think down the road, we're going to be working with GMRI on some education for schools around some of that stuff. So they definitely, yeah. So, but there's Maine has more nonprofits per capita than any other state. So yeah, we got a lot of nonprofits in the state. Yeah, a lot of them. Excuse me. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Monique, we have another environment related question about recent rains and why we haven't seen a lot of red tide.
Oh my God, I have no idea. I'm so sorry. Matt, you guys know?
That's beyond my, I don't know much about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not.
I know it doesn't
super
affect
complicated.
lobsters.
Yeah, red tide doesn't affect lobsters. Maybe it has to do with, there's been so many closures.
Maybe the water temperature, because the water is warmer, you know, in the summer when you see red tide.
Yeah.
I'm just spitballing here.
Yeah, I don't know.
We
We can come up with lots of
I know, yeah,
theories, but
I'm
we
not
don't have an answer.
Zero. Zero out there.
We can probably try to find one if that person wants to leave their email address or something. We can definitely do something like that. Did you guys have it? The last question I have is anything else? Question mark. Moving forward. Matt and Chris, if you had kids, would you want them to go fishing?
Yes.
I want my kids to have the ability to choose to go fishing if they want.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's probably why I don't have kids, 'cause yes, they're going.
You're absolutely going fishing. That's great. There's no other questions? Last time we had so many questions from people. Anything, lobster industry, ground fish industry, local seafood. Matt, what's your favorite type of fish to eat?
I really don't. I'd rather catch it and let it go. I don't eat fish, don't eat lobster, only shrimp, scallops, that's what we see.
I know a lot of lobstermen that don't eat lobster. Chris, you eat lobster? No. I love it. Yeah, I
My wife
eat it.
wants to.
I'd eat it every.
Yeah, me too.
I wish I liked it, because I would eat it every day, but like, I don't like.
We're getting a feeling that it would be very hard for a kid to start doing ground fish fishing. Or an adult, or anybody, because of the, it's so expensive to start. So does that mean that there are the same number of fish being fished, but just like fewer entities that in the Holbrook community, or just fewer ground fish being fished? What is, how did it happen?
Wow. Maybe I did, maybe no more questions. That's a tough question, only because there are seemingly fewer groundfish boats in Maine. There used to be quite a few, and Harpswell used to be one of the places where a lot of groundfish was landed, places like St. George, Harpswell. Now, almost all groundfish, like 90+% of groundfish, is landed via the Portland Fish Exchange in Portland. But because of rules and prices, a lot of groundfish boats now land in places like Gloucester, Massachusetts, or New Bedford, Massachusetts. So there are still quite a few active groundfish boats. It's just a matter of where they're landed. And so the way that groundfish is caught, though, is by a quota that fishermen either have already attached to their permits or that they have to buy to be able to go fishing. And sometimes quota can also get pretty expensive. So it's one of the most, in my opinion, complicated fisheries to sort of even just share about, but for fishermen to even manage and understand and enter into because of all the fluctuating costs, the high costs of getting the licenses, the high costs of learning, the high costs of the boat and the gear, as well as the ability to keep fishing. But for some groundfish fishermen that are established, it's a fantastic business, and people should be eating tons of fin fish, lots of seafood. Seafood has, did I already say this? The zinc, selenium, and vitamin D that
You didn't say
everybody
that,
needs.
but yeah.
Okay, I've said it like 5 times today, so I don't know if I said it here or just another place.
Eat a lot of fish.
But eat a lot of fish. It's very good for your immune system, which we should all be thinking about right now. It's got zinc, selenium, and vitamin D. So groundfish is much like the lobster industry, incredibly regulated and managed, and people should feel comfortable about eating it. And if people do want to get into the groundfish fishing industry, usually what they do is they call Maine Coast Fishermen's Association or a similar entity to say, how do I get a permit? Where are they for sale? And my boss, Ben, would start to broker a deal, find other fishermen that have permits and things like that. But they're not making new permits. It's not something that, you know, people are just handing stuff out. The permits that are out there are what's out there. So, yeah. Scallop season's coming up, so keep that in mind too.
Yeah.
Ooh, there's a lady behind you.
How was the price set for lobster and why was it higher the sun?
Yeah,
It's a mystery.
Yeah.
yeah, we're trying to figure that out too.
So,
Certainly not based on normal economics, I can tell you that.
so some people say market and demand, and that's obviously true. All products pricing is via market and demand. believe that that's a portion of what goes on in the lobster industry for setting prices, and that there are other factors at work, like what's going on in Canada, what's been stored, what's the meat market doing versus the whole product doing. So there's a lot of these different things going on. I think the prices this summer were a little bit higher because of some border issues and things that were going on in Canada. We were more dependent on our own lobster more than we ever were. And by our own lobster, I mean Maine lobster, which set the price a little bit higher, especially if you were going places for lobster rolls that only purchase picked meat. That's why the price was kind of high, is because picked meat is always a very high price. And so if the value of the lobster to the boat is already somewhat high, then it's going to be high to picked meat as well. The one thing I'll say about the price of lobster, though, to keep in mind is these guys don't set the prices. These outside forces do. But these guys still have to deal with inflation for every other thing that they do, whether it's steel, bait, fuel, their boats, everything. And so that price of that lobster does not always reflect the cost of doing business in the lobster industry. So in my opinion, the price should be high because the price that they're paying is high.
It was right prices.
Yeah, the
This
price
is
this
probably the first summer in my short life that I've felt that we actually got what I would consider a fair price, just based on what it cost me to go catch that lobster. Especially, I mean, I was in the grocery store the other day, it's $7 a pound for red hot dog, you know?
So nobody had to catch
Yeah,
those.
yeah, chicken feet or whatever it is, I don't know, I don't wanna know, because I like a red hot dog. But, you know, the price of everything's just gone up, unfortunately, and for once, lobsters weren't the last to do it. It was nice.
Not to mention they're a wild product.
Yeah.
So the last product that people kill and cook in the home. Nobody's out there plucking chickens and.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a wild product. It should have a value attached to it, both for the harvester,
Free range.
no GMOs.
In the same breath, I mean, you can kind of think of lobster, we are farming things.
Of course you are.
Yeah. Yeah, we just feed them and
for
feed them and feed them and feed them until they get big enough to keep them.
They're bugs.
Yeah.
They're bugs, yeah. So it's the lobster price is always a tricky thing, and it's the same bluefin tuna is also a price that's always kind of funny because everybody sees the articles about the first bluefin tuna sold in the year, right? Is lucky in the Asian markets, and so they're willing to pay millions. $3 million, I think it was like last year for that first bluefin tuna. That is not what sets the price at all. And so seafood's just sort of constantly fluctuating according to what's available and what people want. So, but I would always say to keep in mind the true cost of seafood, and that is, you don't want to think about it. I know I don't want to think about it because, like I said, my family's out there and I adore you guys. And bad things happen on the ocean. There's not a lot that you can be control of when weather decides to change quickly, tides decide to change quickly. You put your foot in the wrong place. You put your hand through the hauler. These are all things that I think about when I think about the price of lobster, more so than just the fact that it tastes good. And so I think that that's something that should be considered in the price as well.
You know, it's a lot like farming because the farmers suffer from inflation of all the inputs, diesel, fertilizer, all that stuff. And they have unless they're heavy, they have virtually no ability to control price.
Absolutely. I adore my farmer friends, but the one thing that they have is advocacy at the USDA for resources, funding, and opportunities.
Government programs to support.
Yeah.
Oh, are Americans eating more fish in general now than say 10 or 15 years ago?
That's what I've read. So seafood was the number one growing protein in grocery stores through the pandemic. And I think that that's in part because people tend to only eat seafood in restaurants, right? It's like, oh, a special occasion, I'll get fish. And because people weren't going to restaurants as much, they still wanted opportunities, I guess, for special occasions, or maybe they had the time to learn how to cook fish. But things like lobster roll kits, their sales were amazing. And seafood sales in the grocery store were really good. And I hope that continues. I hope that trend continues, that's for sure. It's also like, it's just a super healthy option. So hopefully that encourages people to keep eating more fish as well. But yeah, there's been a lot of growth in the market. That's been pretty amazing.
It was also because meat was so high that
Probably.
it looked the same, you know, it used to be fish was
comparable.
higher, but now it's comparable. So you can get ground beef or haddock.
I think consumers are on the other side too and starting to get more willing to try different types of food than they were for a while. Like tinned seafood is making a comeback, like it was in Vogue magazine. And then there's like tinned seafood, tinned fish cookbooks and stuff now. And I feel like sardines and herring and yeah, mackerel and things like that, which I feel like a few years ago you would say to people and they would sort of turn their nose up, and now it's sort of back. Sorry, did you have a?
There was a blurb in the Brunswick paper today on those anniversary dates that said the Catholic Church ended the Friday's fish thing in something like 1984.
Really?
Really, my mother, she's a devout Catholic, she still does that every Friday.
Let's not tell anyone. Let's not tell anyone.
There was a dip in seafood consumption with that when they ended that.
There was?
Yeah, because there was no, had to eat fish on Friday according to the church, and they ended that rule. So people could eat meat.
What an odd rule to decide to end. Yeah, who is it hurting? Who was in that meeting?
I think we should bring that rule back.
Yeah, let's bring it back. You don't have to be a part of the church, but you still gotta eat fish on Friday.
Fish Friday.
All forever.
Like Taco Tuesday, it's a thing.
Go ahead.
Have there been any changes in concerns about wellness among fishermen in the last?
Thank you for, did somebody prompt you with that question? Thank you for asking that. I appreciate that. Yes, there has been actually quite a bit. I started a fisherman wellness program at Maine Coast Fishermen's Association through the pandemic. It's actually something I had tried to start a couple of years ago, but it just didn't get the reception that I thought it should. So for farmers at the USDA, there's a number of suicide prevention hotlines, substance use disorder programs. Farm Aid was actually started by Willie Nelson for supporting and advocating for mental health resources for farmers. None of that really ever existed for commercial fishermen before, even though it's one of the most dangerous occupations, civilian occupations in the United States. So during the pandemic, we actually got some rapid funding from one of the foundations with whom we work. They gave us $5,000 just to support fishermen mental health and wellness. And we thought, okay, do we need to make images for social media? Should we put together pamphlets? And we decided to put 100% of that funding towards paying for fishermen to see counselors. So I reached out to Health Affiliates of Maine. I've been building relationships the past couple of years. Health Affiliates of Maine put me in touch with a long list of counselors. And I asked that long list of counselors, do you take appointments within 24 hours? Do you do telehealth? And do you have cancellation fees? And what do you know about the fishing community? So from that list, I have a list of 10 to 15 counselors that we work with. So if someone says my loved one is having some issues with depression, anxiety, stress, substance use disorder, I could give them that list for the counselors. The counselor would call me up and say, I'm working with a fisherman. And then they send MCFA the invoice and we pay it so that they don't have to worry about the first payment. They don't have to worry about billing. They don't have to worry about health insurance. And the idea was just to break down any type of barrier that would exist between a fisherman and getting help. Because for these guys, they don't want to take a day off for water. They can't schedule that far out because what if it ends up being a nice day and then they have to cancel it? Are they going to have to pay for that? So we're working with NAMI Maine, Sweetser, Mid-Coast Health, Health Affiliates of Maine, Northeast Center for Occupational Safety and Health, and Fishing Partnership Support Services to continue to build resources that is specific for commercial fishermen and the lives that they live and the things that they're concerned about. So some of the MCFA staff has gone through mental health first aid training with NAMI Maine. Oh, yeah, Heather was there. She went through our mental health first aid training. We'll probably do it again if people in the community are interested. That was very important. We're trying to continue to build our list of counselors and resources for, to make it sustainable fishermen, so they don't have to rely on MCFA with appointments or finding their counselors. We're going to be training counselors. Hopefully we'll be doing it's called cultural competency. So we'll be working with a group of counselors to teach them about the commercial fishing industry, to have conversations like this, as well as tell them about what's going on with offshore wind development and right whales. So that when a fisherman sits down and says, I'm stressed or I'm anxious, they don't have to start to answer questions about, okay, this is what sector management is, this is what zone lines are, this is what commercial, this is what this means. Those counselors will already have some of that knowledge. It's an incredibly isolating occupation during the best of times. And so there's an element of anxiety, depression, just like we all get like in the winter time. It's elevated now. I think the terminology I use is that fishermen are living with perpetual job insecurity because they don't know if NIMS is going to decide to close the lobster industry tomorrow because of the entanglements. We don't know how much ground fishing is going to be closed down because of offshore wind development, or if they're just going to call it good. So all of these existential threats that are outside of a fisherman's control is just sort of exacerbating that. So, and the financial burdens and all of these things. So it's definitely something much like our farmers that fishermen have. And so we're just going to keep building the program. So fisherman wellness. So thank you for asking, because it's definitely something that's important to consider.
I wanted to add a question from the chat that's related to wellness in terms of safety and that being anxiety provoking for a lot of people. The question is if there's a labor shortage for stern people.
I'll let you guys
You
answer.
know the answer to that.
Yeah.
So,
Yes,
and what impacts maybe that has.
definitely.
Yeah, there's a huge, across the board, right? You see hiring signs everywhere you go. In the lobstering world, it's a lot of the same. I think it's changed a lot from when I was younger, and it was a great summertime job, and you make some good money, and now it's hard to find someone who wants to be invested in and work, and for whatever the reason is. So yeah, I think that poses some safety issues for sure for the captain and other crew on board. But yeah.
I don't know, it is getting harder, but I don't know, I just think it's the generation maybe coming up, because what other job can you go and, I mean, we pay a percentage of the catch, which is a percentage of the business. What other job can you go and they'll offer you 10-15% of the profits of the business that you have nothing invested in, I mean, straight off the top. So I mean, it is a good opportunity, but I think it's just, I don't know what it is, it's getting harder. I'm lucky, I've had the same guy for a few years now. So I haven't had to look, but I have seen others struggle.
I did. I got the carpet pulled out from underneath me like last month.
Oh.
And, when-
Great timing.
yeah, it was.
How can they do that with the money?
I know, right? They're about to make the biggest projects in your life.
And I had to go, put ads on Craigslist, ads on Facebook. You get a pile of people who are semi-interested, and it's tough because experience is important, but it's not a necessity. You just need someone who's willing to sort of be uncomfortable and be trustworthy, I guess, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of time you spend with someone. Hours upon hours upon hours upon days, weeks. But yeah, it was took me a week and a half, and I got lucky by finding someone else, but it's tough for sure.
Yeah, I heard up and down the coast.
I was
Sure, it's
filling in for a captain on Cundy all last year because he couldn't find a full-time guy. He went through 3 people, and the money there that they make is, it's really good. Yeah, it's sad.
The seasickness too, I hear sometimes happens, and then schedules. A lot of people want a week off in the summer. They're like, what do you mean I gotta go fish on the 4th of July? People don't necessarily want to do that as much as.
Yeah, I think that's the harder part, is there is no schedule.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I meant schedule.
Yeah, but I think that's what deters a lot of people is, I mean, I can't tell you, you're gonna work Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday next week, you know, and we're gonna have to wait and see what the weather is. Whereas a lot of other jobs, you get your schedule the week before, you know, and you know when you're gonna have to work, it's hard to plan it out. And it's hard for anybody.
Yeah, it's definitely a lifestyle. I know it took me a few years to get a few to 10, maybe.
That's the best way to
A few
put
years
it.
to understand, like, what do you mean you don't know? We can't go to the movies. And now, you know, it's just,
It's
I
more
make,
of a
I make plans
lifestyle
and
than a
hope
job.
that everybody can come and not try to plan around the schedule.
Yeah, Katie does the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I didn't get you a ticket. I didn't think you'd be here. We have time for one more question probably, and then we don't have to because it is the 7:30, but if anybody had any last.
Quick question. So where's the haddock that we see in the stores? Is that coming from ground fishing boats out of Portland?
It could be Maine, it could be Massachusetts, it could be New Hampshire. It could
But
be
it's
any
probably
place.
coming through the fish exchange.
It could, I don't know, you know, what's actually really interesting is you can go to the Portland Fish Exchange website and see what boats are landing and sort of get an idea. A lot of the haddock probably is more likely out of Massachusetts, and there's nothing wrong with that. They just want to say, you know, eat seafood, because like I said, we have boats that are from Maine that are landing in
I was gonna
Massachusetts.
say there's some Maine guys
Yeah.
that are doing it.
That,
It's just
that
they
are
just-
doing it, they just land there instead. A lot of that comes down to like infrastructure and stuff too.
Where's it caught?
I don't know if they would tell us either.
It's all Gulf of Maine.
Gulf of Maine, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the same area with Lobster, a little bit further than we Lobster for
Yeah.
the most part.
Yeah, different parts. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be, Julia's good at following up, and like I said, we'll have other panels in the springtime. I hope you might join us. Maybe we can be outside, or wouldn't it be nice to be inside with no masks? But thank you so much for coming. Thank you to everybody that watched us on Zoom. If you have any follow-up questions, please reach out to any of us. Thank you to you guys. I really appreciate it. And I hope you all have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Snacks. Yes.